Alright, so in this video we're going to start having the boss do damage to us. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have him shoot a projectile at the player, no matter where the player is. And it'll just sort of automatically make its way to the player. So what we're going to do is I have this sprite, this letter sprite. I'm going to drag this letter 0 into our scene. Just like we've done before, I'm going to make this the player layer and also up the scale to 6 and 6. So there's our letter there right in front of our dog. This is the projectile that we're going to have the mailman send at us. So before we get into our scene, before we have the mailman instantiate it and send it at us, we're just gonna add a script for the letter to follow the player no matter where the player is. So we're gonna add a new script. And we can do that in our scripts folder so we know where it is. Create C# script. I'm going to call this letter controller. And it didn't open letter controller. Come on. There we go. So with letter controller, we are going to we're gonna feed in the player's location, and on update we're going to update the letter's location as we go. So with so on the start, as it's instantiated, we're going to get a reference to the player. So to do this, we're going to declare a transform, call that player, and on start we're going to say player is, and we're going to get a game object dot find. We're going to find the game object. So remember how we updated the tag to player, and we'll only have one game object tagged that way. So to find the game object, instead of, there's multiple ways you can find the game object. You can search for a certain name, so you can do game object find and search for dog. But just in case we have another game object that's named the same thing, or we have multiple instantiations or something like that, and then we're gonna find with we're gonna find a game object with a tag, and that tag is going to be player. So we found a game object, but we have to get the transform of that game object because that's what we declared here. Now that we have a reference to the player, we can change the location of our letter depending on where the player is. And the way we can do that is we can update our transform.position. This is the position of the letter. This is the script is going to be attached to the letter, so we can reference the transform that the script is attached to. We're going to say it's going to be a new vector 3 because we're going to use a player position. Dot move towards and move towards gets our current position and our target position, and then we feed in a float, max distance delta, where we can specify how much to move towards the player. So every frame it's going to move an inch towards where the player is, like its current location. So our current location, transform.position, we'll get the player dot position. That's our target. And then we're gonna make a new float for this called float step. And we're going to, this step is going to be, we want to be able to modify it to see how fast we can make the letter faster or slower depending on what we need. So up here we can make a public float speed, and let's set a default to 1.0f. And so our step will be speed times the time it takes to do the last frame, so time.delta time. So that's how much, this step is how much we're going to inch towards the player. So step, and we can test that out with our current letter. So let's move the letter to a safer distance, and then we'll add a script. We'll just drag and drop the letter controller on here. It's a speed of 1. We'll probably need to modify that. Yeah, it's a bit slow, but you can see no matter where I am, it's gonna like try to inch towards me. So let's do a speed of 10 instead. It's probably too fast. It's frightening. Okay. It doesn't look quite right because this is one of the only things where I haven't provided an animation for it. You can see that there, oh no, there is. Okay, so we can just add the animation to that. Let's drag and drop our, oops, I just tried this out. We drag and drop, we find a letter, and we drag and drop our letter rotate animation that I've provided here for you to the letter game object, and we'll see that an animator has been created with an animation for letter rotate, so we can see it rotate like that. And it'll play on awake, so like immediately when it's instantiated, it's just going to loop this animation, and it looks pretty decent actually. Now what we need is to have a collider on this guy so that when he has hit the player, we can detect that collision and make something happen. So this letter, we say add component collider. We'll just do a circle collider. Let's look at that in the scene. That's a pretty, it seems to be sized correctly. I like that. And in our dog controller scripts, we're already detecting collisions. We can detect a different tag and do something differently if that tag hits us. So if we have a letter and we call it, let's add a tag, let's say hazard. So any other attack that we make, we can tag it hazard. So as soon as you collide with that hazard, it will trigger something. So in our dog controller, we can check if the collision dot transform dot tag is hazard. Then we can trigger a death of some kind. So maybe we want to create a function here that does things, whatever we need to when the dog has been hit and it's dead. I should note in this, to sort of simplify things in this project, I'm not going to implement a health system. I think the interest of this type of boss battle is to see how long you can live, so we'll do a little score system. And if you get hit once, then you restart the game. So here in our dog controller, as soon as we get hit by one hazard, we're going to be dead, and we can call this function dead. And we'll have an animation for the dog. Check our animator. And we can say at any state, if we can have another parameter, trigger dead. At any state, if we get hit and we trigger dead, then we'll trigger the dead animation. So we got this dead dog, and it's more like he's playing dead. It's like a nice kind of animation. And we'll trigger this with a dead trigger. No exit time and no transition. We're gonna immediately go into our little dead state. So in this animation, and we don't need to get out of this because this is the last animation we'll see before we reload the game. Alright, so in our script again, we're gonna trigger an animation. So the anim.setTrigger. Nope. Dead. And game over. And then later we're gonna do whatever we need to for our game over, and we'll do that later. So let's test. This guy is tagged as a hazard. If we collide with the hazard, we should trigger our dead function and our dead animation. So let's try it out. Yep, there he is. Do I want this to loop, or do I want it just to play once? I guess looping is fine. Alright, so the next step would be for the boss to be able to spawn this and send it toward us. So actually, we need this projectile can't live forever, so it might be nice to have some sort of timer where after a few seconds it just sort of goes away. So just like we're doing with our boss controller, the mailman controller, and the little timer that we have, and the switch state time, and decrementing that, we can do the same with the letter controller, and we can just basically destroy the letter when the timer has run out. So we can make a public float. What do we want to call this? Lifetime seems to, yeah, maybe just life, I guess. And we'll set that to 1 second. We'll need to up that in the inspector. And what we'll do is we will say life is minus equal to time dot delta time on update, and if life is than 0. Then we can say, can we do destroy this? So it should destroy the game object that this script is attached to after 1 second. Let's test that out and also change the amount of life it has. Let's say, that can be misleading though, like it has a health system or something. Maybe I want to call it like target time, or pursuit time, maybe pursuit time. Let's try that. And we'll change this to pursuit time and this to pursuit time. Okay, so it should destroy itself after 1 second. Oh, I guess I destroyed the script, so we need to destroy this dot game object. So now I'll destroy the game object that the script is attached to. 1 second, pop. Okay, so we don't have to worry about it for too long. Let's maybe do 10 seconds. Is that too long? He's going to send another projectile at us before this thing goes away. So maybe cut that in half. We'll do 5 seconds. We can always change this later. Okay, now I'll actually have this dude like send this out to us. And how we'll do that is we're going to make this letter a prefab. So I'm going to go into my project prefabs folder and just drag and drop this game object into our prefabs folder, and now I can like instantiate a bunch of them in the scene like so whenever I need. I'll delete this guy because we don't need him, but we need a way for the mailman to during his animation right about here. He does this twice, so like somewhere in the middle maybe. Right there. How long is this? 15 seconds. We can have an event, and we'll need to define this event in our mailman controller. So what we'll do is we'll get a public at the top of mailman controller. We're going to have a public game object, and this will be our prefab, so we'll just call it a letter. And we'll have a function, public void send letter. And what we'll do is we will instantiate our letter, and then just by like instantiating it, we will put it in the scene and it'll start following our dog, and that's fine. One thing that we might want to change is that we need to instantiate it at the location that our mailman is at. So you can see I can keep adding, I can add, there's different ways to instantiate things. So one way that I want to do it is actually feed in a position, and to feed in a position I also have to feed in a rotation. So I will do a transform position, so it'll spawn it at the same location as the mailman, and then also quaternion. That's how we define rotations. Identity, so just like the sort of standard rotation 0, 0, 0 for our game object. And in our animator, if we call this function send letter halfway through the animation, it should spawn a letter and come towards us. Oh, we didn't feed in our prefab. So here in our mailman controller, oops, we drag and drop our letter and hit play. And it just sends it at us. And we did. Something that I want to change is that, like, I can still move the dead dog once I've been hurt. So just as a way to prevent that, on our dead function, we can stop the movement of, actually not in the function. We can say, we can have a bool, and because on update, we are changing the position of our dog all the time. And we only want to do that if we're not dead. So all of this, we can put an if statement around. Starting from when we're updating the position here, I think. So we can do a boolean up here. Bool is attacking, and then we'll also a bool dead, and these are both false. And as long as we're not dead, and just make sure our squirrely brackets are encapsulating all of that. As long as we're not dead, we can update the position. Otherwise, don't. And when we are dead, we can update our boolean to true. Now, once we get hit by the letter, it should not allow us to move. Oh, but it's also moving us. Okay, so that's a nice thing. That's an easy thing that we can do, is that after we say the bool is true, we can also say that our collider is not enabled. So instead of like referencing our collider up here, if we're only going to mess with it once, we can do that within our function get component. So at the moment that we've been hit and that we're dead, we can get our collider and disable it. So enabled equals false. Now we won't get pushed or anything like that. The letter should disappear after 5 seconds. It's still, it's kind of weird. You know what we can do in our letter? In our not in our letter, in our dog controller, if we're dead, then we can also destroy the game object that killed us. So we can say collision destroy, and we'll do collision dot, can I just do, yeah, collision dot game object. that'll take care of the first letter, but also the mailman is sending us other projectiles and letters and stuff. So I think what we'll do is we can have him have another behavior, and we can switch to that behavior if he's victorious, so he's not moving around the scene anymore. It's just a nice little polish element. So let's do that real quick. So in our mailman controller, we're going to add a victory behavior, and we will we're going to switch depending on our boss behavior. We want to specifically switch to victory. So what we'll do is anytime like we can if his behavior is victory, if because we're calling the switch state over and over, we need to have a break. We can actually just do nothing. So as long as it's victory, don't do anything. Yeah, that's fine. It'll keep calling this switch state. But even though it's keeping on calling it, we're victorious. So the victory will keep getting triggered. We could, I guess, save us from calling this over and over by making our switch state time like 100 or something like that, so that it only calls it every 100 seconds or something. But we also want to, this is public. So in our dog controller, when we're dead, we can do a game object find with tag. So any of our enemies, we will get a component dot is this going to allow me to get component? Find game object with tag. Okay, I have to do only one at a time. Mailman controller dot boss behavior, and we can set that to boss behavior dot victory. So we only, it's a little weird that we only call, or we only change it to victory from outside of the script. We can change that later if we want, but let's test it out. It's going slow. Get hit by a letter. And then it's not changing. Yeah, it's not changing our state, which is great. Okay, I think we're pretty much set up. In the next video, I mean, we have the basic gameplay down. In the next video, we can get our score set up, and then we'll just be doing polish stuff after that. So we'll add some audio and some nice effects to everything.